Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences and powerful lessons come to life. Today, we're diving into a journey of self-discovery, family dynamics, and the delicate balance between love and independence. This is the story of Lucy, a woman who learned the hard way that living for yourself doesn't mean you love your family any less. Join me as we explore the emotional roller coaster of following your own path and finding the courage to stand up for what truly matters. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. It's funny how life often shapes us without us even realizing it. How certain moments, even when seemingly small, leave a lasting imprint on our hearts and minds. I've always been the careful one, the quiet one, the one who thought things through before making decisions. But my story really starts with something much simpler than any grand choice I could have made. It starts with the way I grew up. With the roles we all played in our family and the expectations that came with them. I was the younger sister. The second child. My sister, Kate, was always the center of attention, whether it was with our parents or even extended family. She was the one they always seemed to revolve around. She was the perfect child. The one who could do no wrong. Who always had things handed to her. Our parents showered her with affection, buying her the things she wanted, supporting her in every decision, and constantly prioritizing her needs over mine. It wasn't that they didn't love me. No, but somehow, there was a clear difference in the way we were treated. And while I never voiced it out loud, I felt the weight of that difference every single day. Growing up in the small town of Lancaster, in the heart of the Midwest, we didn't have a lot, but we made do. There was always food on the table, always a roof over our heads. But money was tight. Still, Kate seemed to glide through life, while I had to be far more careful with everything I did. I learned early on the value of being frugal, of saving even the smallest amounts of pocket money, of finding ways to get by without asking for more. I remember there were times when I would get upset about the things I couldn't have, things my friends had, things I had wanted so badly, but I never let it show. Instead, I focused on what I could do with what I had. In a way, I think that's what helped me most as I grew older. I never felt entitled to anything. And I always believed that if I wanted something, I would have to earn it, put in the work for it. This mindset became my driving force, especially when I chose to pursue a career in finance. Being an investment analyst wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. It was the kind of job that rewarded discipline, attention to detail, and above all, patience. I became meticulous with my money, careful about every dollar I spent. And it started to pay off. Slowly but surely, I saved enough to think about something I had always dreamed of, a house. A peaceful retreat away from the noise of city life. I had spent years imagining this house. Not a mansion, not a grand estate. No. I had always pictured something much more modest. Something small and warm, tucked away on a quiet street in a rural town. A place where I could come home after a long day of work. A place to retreat into myself, where I didn't have to be anyone else but who I was. The house would be in Vermont, a state I'd fallen in love with after a trip a few years earlier. It was the perfect blend of nature and simplicity, away from the hustle of urban life. My vision was clear, a small, cozy cottage with a fireplace, large windows, and a garden where I could grow herbs and flowers. It was going to be my sanctuary. I remember the moment I knew I could afford it. I'd been following the real estate market for months, crunching numbers, setting aside every extra penny. And then, one day, I found it, the perfect house. It wasn't much, but it was everything I had dreamed of. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy, that I wouldn't have to make sacrifices along the way. But I knew that this was something I needed, something that would give me peace and stability in a world that often felt overwhelming. So, I did it. I bought the house. It wasn't a spontaneous decision, but rather the result of years of careful planning and hard work. I was proud of myself. Proud that I had finally achieved something on my own. Something I had envisioned for so long. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have possibly anticipated, was the way my family would react when they found out. My parents, particularly my mother, were not happy, and I can't say I was surprised. They never understood why I was so determined to live alone, so far away from everyone. In their eyes, I was still their little girl, And little girls were supposed to stay close to their families. To be supported. To be taken care of. I never fit that mold. I had always been independent. And that independence often felt like a burden to them. The house I had bought wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of everything they had hoped I would be. Someone who stayed home. Someone who fulfilled their vision of what my life should be. But I didn't want to live for their expectations. I didn't want to sacrifice my happiness just to meet their standards. And so, with that house, I took the first real step toward living life on my own terms. When I called my family to tell them about the house, I expected them to be surprised. Maybe even impressed. I mean, after all, it was a huge milestone, one I'd worked for years to achieve. But what I didn't expect was the disappointment. The silence that followed my announcement. It was as if I had thrown a wrench into the carefully planned expectations my family had of me. And they didn't know how to process it. I remember the conversation vividly. I was sitting in the small kitchen of my new home in Vermont, sipping on a cup of coffee when I dialed my mother's number. I hadn't really thought it through, just wanted to share the good news. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they would be happy for me. But when my mother picked up, her voice was distant, almost too calm. "So, you really went ahead with it," she said, her words sounding heavier than I had anticipated. "Yes, Mom," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "I've been planning this for a while. It's exactly what I wanted. A place where I can have some peace." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. "Emma, I don't know what to say," she began, her voice tight. "I thought you'd have more sense than this. A house in Vermont? What about your career? What about staying close to family? You don't think about us, do you?" I was stunned. My mother had always been someone who had certain expectations of me. But I never imagined she would react this way. We had always talked about family, the importance of being there for one another, staying close, but I thought she'd understand that my decision was about finding balance in my own life. Yet somehow, I was still expected to adhere to a script I had never agreed to. Before I could respond, she continued, "Sarah's family is growing, and we need a bigger place. We've talked about this before. Why didn't you consider getting something more family-oriented?" Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. She was right. Sarah, my older sister, had recently married and was now expecting their second child. To my parents, this meant that the focus had shifted entirely to Sarah's growing family. They always assumed I would be the one to shoulder the responsibility of hosting everyone, of providing space for them to gather, just as I had done in the past. It felt like a slap in the face. I had spent my entire life watching Sarah get everything she wanted, the attention, the support, the opportunities. She was the one who could make mistakes and be forgiven instantly. The one who was always in the spotlight. And now, with my decision to purchase a house, I had shattered that image. I was no longer the invisible, obedient daughter who went along with their plans. I was the daughter who was carving her own path. And it seemed to upset them more than I could have imagined. "I don't understand why you don't just buy a bigger place. One that can accommodate all of us," my mother went on. "Why didn't you think about Sarah and her family? They need help. Emma, you've always been the one to stay on the sidelines. Why are you pushing us away now?" The words stung, and for a moment, I felt the familiar rush of resentment I'd suppressed for years. I could feel my heart racing, my chest tightening. Why did it always have to be about Sarah? Why couldn't my needs and desires be just as important? I had worked for this, saved every penny, planned every step, and yet, all they saw was a daughter who was no longer fitting the role they had assigned to me. "I didn't buy this house for Sarah or for anyone else, Mom," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I bought it for myself. This is something I've wanted for a long time. And I deserve it. I'm not going to apologize for that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And for the first time, I felt like I had truly spoken my truth. It wasn't easy, and it didn't come without guilt. But it was a necessary conversation, one I had been avoiding for far too long. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my new home, unsure of what to feel. I was proud of my decision, but also weighed down by the tension that now hung between me and my family. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. How could they? They had always seen me as the dutiful daughter, the one who would quietly accept whatever role they handed me. But I was no longer that person. As I looked out the window at the green hills and the peaceful surroundings of Vermont, I realized that this house wasn't just a home, it was a declaration of independence. A space where I could finally breathe without the constant pressure of other people's expectations. It was mine. But that didn't make it any easier to deal with the fallout from my family. The days after I bought the house were a strange mix of satisfaction and regret. I felt proud of myself for finally making a decision that was entirely my own. But the weight of my family's disapproval seemed to follow me everywhere. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the fact that I had chosen to take a step away from their expectations. And that felt like a betrayal in their eyes. The phone calls kept coming, one after another. First, it was my mom, then, Sarah, and finally, my father. I couldn't bring myself to pick up most of them. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to face them. I knew what they would say, that I was selfish, that I had made a mistake, and that they were disappointed in me. They had always wanted me to be the one to stay close, to provide for the family, and to take care of everything. The idea that I had bought a house for myself, without considering how it would affect them, was inconceivable to them, but it was my truth. And deep down, I knew that if I didn't stand my ground now, I would spend the rest of my life living under their thumb, never truly stepping into who I was meant to be. The inevitable confrontation came one Sunday evening when I invited my parents and Sarah's family over for dinner. I had hoped that maybe, in person, the tension would soften, but as soon as they walked through the door, I could tell it wasn't going to be that simple. My mother's face was tight with anger, and Sarah barely made eye contact with me. Even my father, usually a man of few words, looked unsettled. "Emma, we need to talk," my mother said before I could even offer them drinks. "This isn't just about a house. This is about your responsibilities. You're the youngest, but you've always been the one to take care of everything. We've always counted on you." Her words were meant to sound like concern, but I could hear the underlying accusation in her tone. I wasn't the person they thought I was supposed to be. I had become something else, a person they didn't recognize, a person they didn't understand. "I did take care of everything, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've taken care of everyone, and I've never once asked for anything in return. But this time, I'm doing something for me. I don't want to keep putting everyone else's needs ahead of mine. I've worked hard for this. I deserve it." "But Emma," Sarah chimed in, her voice laced with frustration, "you're acting like this is some sort of selfish thing. But don't you see? We're a family. We should all be looking out for each other. And you're just leaving us behind. You bought this house, and now you're acting like you don't owe us anything." That was the breaking point. I felt my chest tighten, the familiar surge of resentment rising up inside me. I had spent my whole life supporting them, emotionally, financially, even physically. I had always been the one who made sure everyone was okay. But now, when it was time to do something for myself, I was being accused of abandoning them. "Sarah," I said, my voice sharp, "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm not responsible for your family's needs. Just like you're not responsible for mine. We all have our own lives to live. I've always been there for you. But this is about me now. I'm not going to apologize for that." The room fell silent. My parents exchanged a look, and I could see the disappointment written all over their faces. My father finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual, but still heavy with reproach. "You've always been the one to take the back seat, Emma. We've always known you'd be the one to put others before yourself. But this isn't the daughter we raised. You're not thinking about the bigger picture." I wanted to scream, to tell them how suffocating it had been, how I had spent years burying my own needs in favor of their plans. But instead, I took a deep breath and said something that I had never said before. "Maybe you didn't raise me to be the person I am now. But this is who I am. And I can't keep living in a way that makes everyone else happy but never myself." There was no immediate resolution. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere was tense, charged with unspoken words. I could tell that my parents were disappointed in me, that they didn't quite understand what I had done or why I had done it. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify myself. I wasn't doing this for their approval, I was doing it for me. As they left later that night, I stood at the door, watching them drive off. I knew the rift would take time to heal. But for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I had finally made a decision that was my own. And no matter how hard it was, I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. In the quiet of my new home, I realized that the house wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of my independence. My ability to make choices that were true to myself. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the first step toward rebuilding a relationship with my family, on my own terms. In the days that followed, the tension between my family and me began to ease. But it wasn't an overnight process. Relationships, especially those rooted in years of unspoken expectations, take time to mend. Slowly, my parents started to understand why I had made the choices I did. Not because I didn't love them, but because I had to start living for myself. I wasn't abandoning them, I was finally claiming my own space in the world. Sarah and I too found a way to communicate more openly. The resentment began to fade as we both realized that our paths, though different, didn't have to be in opposition. She still had her own dreams and responsibilities. But I had mine now. And that was okay. Looking back, I see how this journey was about much more than just buying a house. It was about self-discovery, standing up for my own needs, and letting go of the fear of disappointing others. It was about realizing that love doesn't always mean sacrifice. And sometimes, it's okay to put yourself first. As I stood in the kitchen of my new home, surrounded by the warmth of the life I was building for myself, I felt a quiet sense of pride. Not for the house, but for the person I had become. I had learned that growth often requires stepping outside the comfort zone of familiar expectations and creating space for your own dreams. Thank you for following my journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more life stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's always more to learn, more to share, and more to discover about life, love, and the lessons we learn along the way. Stay tuned for more.